divide your life up into micro and macro. Micro is the grassroots of your life. There is no reason whatever emanating from Washington why you cannot redouble your zeal to reach down and hold the hand of a child in need, to help your neighbor, to exert empathy and compassion and loving kindness in your life. There's no one stopping you from doing that. It's between you and your God, or you and the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
You should just do it in your individual personal life, your family, your city, whatever.
My name is Frank Schaeffer, and this is a podcast called In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And my guest today is Peter Samuelson, and Peter is the co-founder, president of First Star, which manages 17 high school academies on college campuses with youth in foster care. He is the co-founder, along with Steven Spielberg, of Starbright World, the world's first avatar-based social network for seriously ill teenagers. Today, we're going to be talking about his book, which I just finished reading this morning, and it's called Finding Happy, A User's Guide to Your Life with Lessons from Mine. And my boilerplate is please subscribe right now on YouTube, and to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer on Apple Podcasts, and to my Substack commentary page, it has to be said, at frankschaeffer.substack.com. So I'm going to do something I never do, Peter, which is we're going to be talking about your book, so don't worry, but I'm going to talk for about 4 to 5 minutes because I know a lot about you. I just finished your book. I read every word. I have tons of quotes. We're going to go into it. I've got a way to set the whole thing up, and I love the book. But I talk to a lot of authors, all kinds of disciplines, college presidents, political figures, musicians, and all the rest of it. But what I don't talk to is people who are more or less exactly my own age. I was born in 52, you were born in 51, and whose life weirdly overlaps mine in a kind of indirect but a strange way, because I'm an author and I've written some bestsellers, and that's how I earn my living. But before that, I was heavily involved in the movie business, and I'm going to give you a thumbnail sketch so that when we're talking, you know what I know, so our conversation will be more fruitful because so much of yours is in the movie business. So the first thing to say is I am a failed feature film director. I made 4 feature films in Hollywood in the 80s. And I had a mentor, you talk about mentors in your book, by the name of John Cohen, who was running EMI Pictures at the time. And John and Barbara were very kind. They would let me sleep in their house when I would come and do endless meetings, which you know about, most of which go nowhere. The way I got into the movie business, and this is where I go off the chart into a world that even you are not connected with. I grew up in an evangelical missionary family in Switzerland, in the Swiss Alps. The Swiss Alps, as you know, house a lot of things, including bankers who stole money from people, but also cults come to Switzerland. They like it. The Rosicrucians, everybody you ever heard of that started a cult has a Swiss base or at least a bank account. And my parents moved to Switzerland in 1947, started a ministry that turned into a personality cult called L'Abri Fellowship. And so I had several childhoods. The first was in this tiny underfunded chalet clinging to the edge of the Swiss Alps as the son of missionaries who were talking about Jesus, and everyone who's not a saved, born-again Christian is going to hell. Then my parents started writing books in the 60s and 70s and got incredibly famous in religious circles worldwide. So if you ask an evangelical Christian, have you ever heard of Francis Schaeffer? It's like asking someone in the movie business if they've ever heard of Steven Spielberg. A huge deal in that world. So then the second part of my childhood and teenage years was as the son of this very famous father. And then in the 1970s, I became his nepotistic sidekick. And I'd been making Super 8 movies in my studio where I was also painting. And based on the fact that I was his son, I wound up producing 2 film series, which cost multi-millions of dollars. And even then, that was a lot of money. One was called How Should We Then Live, which was to answer the BBC series called Civilization, on the rise of art and culture that you know about. And he was going to give the evangelical view of art. So here I was in the Roman Forum with a rented chariot and somebody going by, and Dad talking about Rome and the decline of Rome because of its decadence and the rise of Christianity. We made a second series with Dr. Sierra Koop, who became Ronald Reagan's Surgeon General, and we traveled around the world making an anti-abortion film called Whatever Happened to the Human Race that most historians credit with the beginning of the evangelical involvement in what had been a Roman Catholic cause. I then left the evangelical world, and I've written memoirs about this. We won't go into it, and I'm long gone and out of that and a very different point of view these days. But I lost all my source of income of what I called God cash, because the big bucks are not in Hollywood, they're in God business. And I'm not being facetious. And so I cut a reel out of my 25 hours of these documentary series, left out all the God bits, headed to Hollywood, and had the good fortune to stumble on John and Barbara Cohen. He liked my work, helped me get an agent, and then I directed Wired to Kill, Headhunter, Rebel Storm, and the last with Carol Kane and Judge Reinhold in Canada in 1990, a very unfunny comedy called Baby on Board. And then I was very lucky because I had a wife named Jeannie, who I got pregnant when we were 17 and 18. 55 years later, we're still together. So I loved everything you wrote about love, and we're going to talk about it because you totally nailed it, which is wonderful. And Jeannie said to me, "Why are you making all these shitty movies you hate? And commuting to LA with your little room on Hollywood Boulevard, instead of writing down something that actually has something to do with your life and your weird experiences in your childhood and the mission?" So I wrote a novel called Portofino, which got a big break because Richard Eder, who was the head reviewer for the LA Times, did a 6-column, half-page review, headlined it's a worthwhile trip down the road to Portofino. And the book totally took off. The Guardian called it one of the best 12 novels of the year. It was in Hatchard's bookstore in London as their book of the month. And since then, I've written a dozen books and been a successful writer, with some books selling well and others not at all, but I've earned a living through it. So when I read your book, I thought about my last meeting, because you have something I'm going to read from your book that I call the understatement of the century. Producing films is a very risky profession. The odds against getting an individual script that one develops made into a film are depressingly long. Well, as part of my adventure of those odds, my last meeting in Hollywood, and you'll think I'm making this up, except you won't because you've been everywhere and done everything, was with Stephen Bach, who then wrote a book called Final Cut about the calamitous Heaven's Gate and Michael Cimino. Well, I had finally made these 4 shitty movies, but finally had a meeting at one point, I think before the last film I made in the late 80s, with Stephen Bach, where he hired me to make a story out of the life of Han van Meergren, an art forger who had forged Vermeers. And he said, "Well, you're an artist and you made these movies, and there's, you know how to move a camera." I went and I waited in a hotel for 10 days for him to return my call. Finally went over to United Artists the day that the police were clearing out his studio where he had been fired, and there were security guards and boxes, and he was already gone. And then the next thing I saw of him, he'd written this book. So my closest thing to the kind of wonderful things you've done, real movies, big movies, was a final canceled meeting. And in that same time frame, I started writing my novel. So that's the story that I come to your book with. And so when you talk about being with Peter Sellers and Pink Panther 2, and you played the guy at the door that steals his coat, I've got all those movies memorized. My hero is Stephen Fry. I love the movie you made with him. For your book was like swimming in a warm pool. And then the additional part for me that was great is that your wisdom you add at the end of each chapter, aimed at the young people you've given so much of your life to work with, touched me so deeply as a father and grandfather. It was like, yeah, what he said. So that's how I took your book.
Thank you so much. What a perceptive read. This is there's a Jewish word, beshert.
Yeah.
It's things that are meant to be. I have a feeling that this interview is beshert.
Yeah. And I felt the same reading your book. It was like, Even though I know this probably didn't happen between you being in Switzerland doing the Pink Panther while I was there, and then Stephen Fry, who is a hero of mine. I don't know him personally. I envy you. Someone asked me the other day, of all the people who you think, who's the smartest person in the world? I said, well, I don't know, but I know who I think is the smartest person in the world, and it's Stephen Fry.
Yeah, I think he is. I think the word we use is polymath, which
Yeah.
doesn't have anything to do with mathematics.
Yeah,
This means someone who knows quite a lot about everything.
exactly.
When one meets one of these people, they're
Yeah.
a wonderful dinner company
Yeah.
because they really do have something intelligent to say about everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
every time I see an interview with him or any of the TV shows he's on or any of his rambling talks or anything else, I'm always reminded of that. So let me dive into the book a minute here, and I've gone way off track, but the other understatement of the century, and I didn't pull these in order from your book, but I've set it up the way I've set it up, is we have to hope that the majority of Americans will grasp the full extent of myopia and self-serving wrongheadedness among those uh, who cow a previously grand old party now cow a previously grand old party. I, for one, believe strongly in the two-party system. Okay, so you're a little bit political, and then you say most of us feel the urge to do good deeds and support the less fortunate than ourselves based on our shared belief that we are, quote, all in this together, and that the strong should support the weak. Quite often we learn this motivation as a core tenet of our religion or when we are taught a philosophy of life. Certainly, I have taught for children that civilization is fragile and that it is the responsibility of each and every member to improve it and to further build resilient and ambitious social structures to pass on to our children and through them to theirs. And, I was kind of looking, saying, well, if I was your publisher or publicist, what would I send out as the blurb for the whole book? And that paragraph is kind of it, because I think your life in the movie business and the fact that you then parlayed into this immense philanthropic career is kind of an example of using something as shabby as the world I was in with all my failed movie attempts or half-assed bad movies. And here you've parlayed this career into something more than just that. And toward the end of the book, it's very touching because you say, you're going to go away, you're going to pass away. I will too. Everybody will too. But the effect of the work that you've had with these kids is going to last forever. So before we go more deeply into the book, I want you to tell me the story of meeting your wife. I want you to tell the story of how you started all this and how these philanthropic efforts have blossomed and kind of absorbed. I'm not going to call it the second half of your life, but this big chunk of your life, that in addition to all these amazing movies you made.
I'm happy to. It's the best example I can come up with that if you want to meet the right person, do it through philanthropy.
Yeah.
Because you meet better people and you greatly improve your odds of finding the one.
Yeah.
So my cousin, a fledgling actress still living in London, phoned me and said, I've done, I think, a terrible thing because this film that I was in, Arabian Adventure, we went in costume to the children's hospital and we walked around the wards and I met this little boy, Sean, and I asked him what would make him happy. And Sean said, oh, that's an easy question. I want to go to Disneyland.
Yeah.
And my cousin said, what do we do? And I said, well, I think we bring him to Disneyland, don't we? I was already in LA and we flew him and his mum to LA and everyone, including the cousin, moved into my apartment. It was back when I was single. And in 2 weeks, we did all the things you almost certainly shouldn't do with a dying child. But we had a fine old time. He enjoyed himself, which we had hoped for. But there were subtleties, like his mum enjoyed herself. And we realized we've given her an amazing gift together because she will remember her son, and indeed did remember her son, having a fine old time at Knott's Berry Farm and Disneyland and on the beach and whatever, and not with a tube up his nose passing away in a hospital bed in pain. So it was very much in my mind, especially after Sean and his mum went back to London, and he did die.
Yeah.
And it was bittersweet. The sweet was we thought we had done a bit of good, and it wasn't even that difficult.
Yeah.
And the bitter was, he lived in my home, and we knew each other well.
Yeah.
So I called a meeting. What do film producers do? We
Yeah.
call meetings.
Yeah.
The core value is you know how to call a meeting and put a team together.
Mm.
And after work one day, I stood at the end of the table. I had invited who I guessed, but it was only guesswork, might be helpful in starting a charity. I thought, well, you need a lawyer, you need an accountant, you
Yeah.
need a publicist, you better have someone who understands the politics of hospitals and so on and so forth. And I just sort of stood there and I said, this is what we just did. I'm thinking maybe we could reach out. It must be easy to find seriously ill children who are sad. Why don't we just make them happy?
Yeah.
That was functionally the first meeting of the Starlight Children's Foundation.
Yeah.
And I had invited, it was back in my single days, I had invited this very attractive young lady. And I remembered her saying on our one date that she was an accountant.
Mm.
And I phoned her and said, hello, remember me? I'm so sorry that I didn't phone you and I've been traveling and a whole lot of BS. I gave her a line, as it were.
Yeah.
I said, I'm having this meeting. There's this new idea for a charity I've had. And would you come? Because I really would like to have an accountant there. And that was our second date. And when the lawyer said, what do you want to call this new thing? I said, I haven't given it any thought. What do we want to call this thing? She said, the accountant lady, the children's rhyme, starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight. I wish I may, I wish I might have this wish I wish tonight. She said, why don't we call it the Starlight Children's Foundation? And we all said, sure, that'd be great. And there was a lady there. I knew a graphic designer who I invited because I thought we're going to need a logo.
And you got one from her. It was nice too. I looked at it in the book. I was very impressed.
The name of Starlight lends itself to a child reaching for a star. So that was the second date, and then there was a third and a fifth and a 10th and a 15th.
And on we go.
And then we threw a Christmas party in the children's ward at County USC Medical Center.
Yeah,
we had live music. We had a band, and there was one little girl who they wheeled in her hospital bed. And when the music picked up, she danced in her bed because she couldn't get out of bed.
Yeah. And
we had these huge sort of character outfits, like at Disneyland, but we got ours from SeaWorld. So they were all, like a shark and a lobster and a dolphin. And the dolphin had my girlfriend in it. And with her looking out like out of the little grill in its throat so that she could see where she was going. And when I saw her looking at the little girl dancing in her bed because she couldn't get out of the bed, I looked into the grill and all the mascara had run down her cheeks. And that was the moment when I said, oh, my God, I love this woman.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And one thing that I just need to do, because I didn't set this book up properly, given that I was giving you a little sort of a short version of some of my own life experiences as they relate to your subject, so we would understand each other a little better, something I never do, by the way, usually in the context of this podcast. So let me set it up again. Peter Samuel, serial social entrepreneur, but the fact of the matter is also a serial movie producer. And he's written this book, Finding Happiness, A User's Guide to Your Life with Lessons from Mine. It's cut into very short sections, which I know why you did it. First of all, it's very readable that way. But secondly, you're dealing with the generation of young people who, are used to reading text off their phone, and you give them a short vignette from your life and just say, okay, what can we learn from this? So each chapter then has a kind of a little workbook section at the end of what we can learn from what you're saying. And I think the structure works very, very, very well. And so as I go through this and we talk about some of these subjects, I'm not just going to focus on some of the people you know, but you talk about meeting Spielberg. We grew exponentially, geographically, financially, and in terms of the number of kids and families we were helping. Then I was introduced to Steven Spielberg through the ever collaborative career producer of Star Wars, Kathy Kennedy. I pitched up at Amblin and on the Universal Studios lot, entering his outer office. Everything scares the hell out of you. You don't give your collateral material to Mr. Spielberg. You leave that with me. And then you tell the story of how someone says, well, he's going to have another meeting. This is going to be short. You've got a half an hour. And then an hour and a half later, you stumble out with him part of your project. So I'm not just going to go to all the names in your book because you've met everybody. You've been everywhere, Steve McQueen, Spielberg, and all the rest of them. So we could just do that. But your book is about more than that. But tell us what that hour was like a little bit with him. And then since then, what I'm most interested in is how he continued to support you.
Yeah. Well, surreal is the word that comes to mind because first of all, you go in and you shake his hand and he's very friendly. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, he looks exactly like Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, which I loved when you put that in the book. Made me laugh.
He is Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
So we got on like the blazes, and he's saying to me, there's this new thing called the internet. And we could connect seriously ill teenagers from hospital to hospital. And I said, I can absolutely see how we can do that. And he said, they could choose avatars and they could navigate them around in what would appear like a three-dimensional space. And it went on and on and on. And we got each other very, very excited. And at the end of it, he said, okay, I'm in. What do you want me to do?
Yeah.
And I said, you be the chairman. I'll be the president. We'll put a board together and we'll raise some money. He said, if we're going to raise money and I'm the chairman, I had better donate. And I said, well, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, what do you think I should give? And I said, I'm not going to tell Steven Spielberg what he should donate to. I said, give something moderately painful.
Yes.
So over that. And he said, no, give me a number. And I said, no, I'm not going to give you a number. He said, you can't leave unless you give me a number. And I don't even know. I mean, it was like a moment where an angel whispered.
Showed up.
Yeah. I said, $2.5 million. And I saw his mouth in an out of body experience. I saw his mouth say, okay, I can do that.
That's great.
And I stumbled out.
Yeah.
And I was completely discombobulated. I went and hid behind a tree.
Yeah. And cried.
I did. I cried. And then I phoned my wife and I said, I think we have another charity. This will be number 2. And I think he's the chairman and he's going to give $2.5 million. And oh my God. And I have to pull this all together now. And there was a silence. And my wife, Sarah, said, tell me exactly where you are, exactly, because I'm coming to get you. You do not sound safe to drive.
Good point.
I left my car there in the Amblin parking lot.
Yeah.
Sarah came and picked me up in her car.
Well, she obviously loves you because that was a good call and probably serendipitously, saved your life. You never know, but
you never know. But that was the beginning of Starbright, and we actually did it. I mean, when we put T3 lines into children's hospitals so that we could connect them audio visually, it was so early. I'm talking about 1990.
Yeah, nobody else was doing anything close. Well, you talk about a kid in a bed and how do you change the channel on the old black and white TV, and the nurse says, well, he can poke the button with this stick from his bed. And that was kind of your wake-up call to, well, maybe we can do something better for these kids who are stuck in bed flat out and traction, whatever, for months at a time.
And we did. And when we turned on Starbright World, it was so early. I mean, it was before, not only long before Facebook, but long before Second Life and the other things that went before Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg, I actually looked it up. When we turned ours on,
Yes, I like that.
he was 11 years old.
Yeah,
And
and if you had stuck with your dating service, you wouldn't have had to ask Spielberg for $2 million because you'd be Mark Zuckerberg. But I think you've spent your life better than he did.
well, you're kind.
Well, in addition to which, you've helped a lot of kids, and I think a lot of people look at the social media platforms, and from everything I've read and many authors I've interviewed and my own personal experience with grandchildren and others, they have not done unalloyed good for younger people.
Well, the most gratifying thing that's going on right now
Hmm,
is that the early copies are out of the printing press,
that's great.
courtesy of Regalo, Simon and Schuster,
Yeah,
and I have given 500 copies. I've got these 12 first-star academies across the country,
yeah,
high school-aged foster kids, but on the campuses of universities. So boxes of these books
that's great.
have gone out across the country, and I am starting to get feedback.
Well, I like that. Like I said, I like the fact that you geared the length of the sections with the story and then the follow-up material of, okay, here, what can we learn from this experience of mine to an age group which is not sitting down and reading the big books. A lot of even the best universities are complaining about the fact that they're getting students in who just aren't used to reading books. Okay, you have something, I think it's around page 106. I experienced firsthand the power of the American dream. It's a thing more famous in the past, but it certainly still exists. Most Americans seem to have forgotten its value. It is summed up by the famous sonnet by Emma Lazarus on the base of the Statue of Liberty, New York Harbor. Give us your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And quote, it is a sign of the times that more than one politician has attempted to change the phrasing so that it no longer talks about huddled masses, but only about the highly qualified who might be privileged to gain an entry visa into the United States. And so the reason I read that is because, of course, given the fraught moment of history we're in and your connection with people like Stephen Fry, who have a social conscience and have talked a lot about gay rights and other things, and become known for that. And your book has a social conscience. I don't want to spend the whole conversation on this, but as someone who's, in my age group, I have not seen any period of history like this in my life. I went to British boarding schools with people whose fathers had all fought in the war, and I lived through the Vietnam era, the Korea War, and Nixon, and all the rest of it. But I don't know an era in which, as an American citizen, which you are as well, um, that I have felt so discombobulated and disenchanted with the moment of history I'm in, as if somehow I had been transported to an alien planet against my will, because I've never been in a period of American history where I've felt the actual ground under my feet moving, as in, I don't know where I am at this point. And it's not because of the leadership of Donald Trump and his administration. It's because 70 million Americans voted for this a second time, knowing exactly what they were going to get. And here we are. And so I think that, taken from your book, you and I share a philosophy, and that is kindness it is the paramount human value. And one of the things I'm trying to do in this podcast is talk to people who are on the other side of these issues in a way. We had the editor of the Wall Street Journal on, and people like that who I would take issue with some of their views. But those conversations have to continue, and they do in my neighborhood. I walk my dog. I know whose neighbor's lawns my dog poops on, who voted for Trump and who didn't, because I knew where the signs were. But I'm equally friendly to everybody because we've got to find a way through. So I'm going to ask you a philosophical question based on the fact there's a lot of wisdom in your book, and I'm not fishing for anything or putting words in your mouth. But how do you personally, in Los Angeles, in the movie community and your philanthropic community, philanthropy involves a lot of people who had made a lot of money in the oil business, corporations that are probably in bed with Trump now. A lot of these tech bros all had their picture taken with them on the inauguration. But you still got to navigate that world for two reasons. One, you're raising money for what you believe in. And two, you're a human that believes in kindness. So I'm talking to you more like a priest here, and less like an author. What does your life wisdom teach you about how people who want to be kind to everyone navigate this moment while yet taking a stand on what we believe to be true, as you did in that quote that I read?
Sure. It is the core question that anybody with a brain or a soul should be asking themselves.
Yeah.
And I would answer it this way. Divide your life up into micro and macro. Micro is the grassroots of your life. There is no reason whatever emanating from Washington why you cannot redouble your zeal to reach down and hold the hand of a child in need, to help your neighbor, to exert empathy and compassion and loving kindness in your life. There's no one stopping you from doing that. It's between you and your God, or you and the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
You should just do it in your individual personal life, your family, your city, whatever. Then there's the macro. The macro is what we only really get to affect every 2 years. I say 2 years because even though the presidential election is every 4 years, the midterms are effectively every 2 years. We get to use our vote to cause a sea change, if we want, in the leadership of the macro of our nation. I believe that America and the American dream are extraordinarily resilient. And I believe that America will survive everything negative that is going on, and it isn't all negative either. And I do not believe that, the Republican supporters of Donald Trump have horns. I do think there are an awful lot of people in this country who have been seduced by, you would know this, by cult-like mechanisms to only read and listen to people who will amplify their cognitive dissonance and keep them ever further down the rabbit hole of wrong-headedness. But I think it's okay. There are individuals for whom it is definitely not okay. People being snatched off the street and bundled into a van, and they wake up and they're in a penitentiary in Louisiana on their way to a maximum security prison in El Salvador. They're not okay. There are kids in my first star academies where the parents have now been deported and the kids are still here being looked after by an uncle and an aunt, that kind of thing. These are wrong and bad things at a micro level. But for most of us, blessedly, we can continue to live our lives in accordance with our beliefs, and especially in my book, empathy, kindness, generosity, charity. A man never stands so tall as when he reaches down to help a child in need. Those are my core truths. This too shall pass. The only thing I really worry about is the integrity of our election process and our ability as a country of 370 million people to change our mind. You are right that 70 million people voted the opposite way as me. God bless. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know yet. However, I do believe that there is an awakening happening where we realize that, if inflation goes up to 10% and it costs 3 times as much to put food on your kitchen table, the American population is very smart. When you look at opinion polls and things, generally speaking, the joint opinion of more people is better than the opinion of some narrow subset. We are being led by some very self-interested and very pugnacious people. One of the things, so what I say to the kids, what to do, what can you do? Here's what you can do at the macro. Number one, if you've had your 18th birthday, if you're not registered to vote, don't talk to me. Of course, you must be registered to vote. And indeed, you must get off your derriere and vote at every opportunity.
Yeah.
And you must study the issues. You must study who are these local individuals running for judge or county commissioner or whatever it is. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to do research, and you have to exert your democratic vote. The only thing that seriously worries me at the moment, because I think America is resilient enough to get through everything, is some kind of abrogation of the Constitution. I mean, I'm shocked to hear anyone say, when asked by a journalist, well, do you believe it's your responsibility to defend the Constitution, to say, well, yeah, some of it, sometimes, some not. So and
that is shocking.
Constitution. I think we must stand up to that.
Yeah.
But I think we are. I mean, there is a dynamic going on where the autocrats are not having their way. The entire court system, including the Supreme Court, to which 3 members were appointed by the present autocracy in the first term, they are putting restraints and due process. Look, all these people being deported, other than the aircraft that they managed to get out before the judge issued the injunction, everything since has been stayed, overturned. No, there has to be due process. I think that's a good sign. I also think our press, including, by the way, the Wall Street Journal, Asian Fox, we see things there which do create a pushback and a balance, and that's very valuable. One of the things that I've done for years, I read tons of stuff, and I read it every day that I absolutely do not agree with, but I read it anyway. I read every morning the reader comments on Breitbart. And I read the Wall Street Journal, and I read Fox. And I don't agree with a lot of what they say, but I feel it's my responsibility as a citizen, as an immigrant I need to know the intricacies of what the other half of the country or the other third of the country, what they believe. I also know this. When I first came to America, I made television commercials. And the great thing about making television commercials is that every week or 2 weeks, you're making a new one. And in my case, I was running around the country. I was a young man, and I was here we are. I'm making a commercial this week in Chicago. Oh, hello, Albuquerque. Oh, here I am in Alamogordo, and on and on. I learned America, and I learned the American people. Everyone. I just reveled as a young man with curiosity. I loved working on the Navajo Nation reservation in Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, and I've met a lot of the people who voted for the Trump White House, and they are not evil people. To some degree, they were misled, and others, they were told that no one wants to be scared. Humans have been scared since the Stone Age, because, back then and ever since, because the weapons just got bigger and bigger, fear for your life and the life of the people that you love has been a predominant concern for humans for 150,000 years. So along comes an autocrat who says, you don't have to be scared. To be scared is sort of shameful. You're not scared. It's their fault. Those people over there, they did this to you, and they are continuing to do this to you, and I will protect you from them.
Well, more than that, he says, I'll be your revenge.
Well, yeah, and those are feelings of, those are rewarding feelings. They are
Yeah.
superficial, and a lot of it is based on BS. However, that is better than being scared that someone's
Hmm.
taking your job away, someone's gonna, date your
Yeah.
daughter, and the fear of other is very deeply rooted in humans.
Absolutely.
I think it's in the DNA now. We had a family vacation in Perigord in France,
Hmm.
and we went into the prehistoric caves. They have Neanderthal caves, which are the same caves as the Homo sapiens caves from before
Sure.
the Neanderthals were
Yeah.
there. And the first thing you notice when you go in there is it's cold, even though it's hot outside.
Yeah.
It's cold. The ceiling is very low, and
Mm.
it's scary as hell.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, and it's dark.
Mm.
So you've got flashlights and whatnot. And I thought to myself, the experience of being in a tribe, a little tribe, 25
Sure.
people in a cave 120,000 years ago,
Mm.
was that you were scared of everything, especially if you went outside the cave.
Mm.
And the leader of your cave would encourage you to feel safety in your cave family
Sure.
and to fear danger from everything going on outside,
Mm.
not just the saber-toothed tiger, but also those so-and-sos who live on the other side of the valley because they're after our food and they're after our women and they're after
Yeah.
whatever we have. So stick with me. I'll take care of you. And you don't fear them. We just hate them.
Yeah,
Everything is their fault.
not much has changed in the sense that our brains take about 150,000 years to catch up to anything.
I think that's entirely true. So
Yeah.
what to do, what to do, what to do? Well, what I do when I teach is I try to teach discriminating thinking.
Mm.
Think for yourself. You have a brain. Uh,
Yeah.
don't just take it, knee jerk because somebody said it on TikTok. What if it's completely untrue?
Yeah, and maybe do a little reading in
And,
some other
and what
source besides this thing
Yeah,
here.
I say to teenagers, young adults now, you have access to the entire knowledge of the known world, the
Yeah.
whole knowledge of this civilization and other civilizations, historically, present moment,
Hmm.
right there in your cell phone. For goodness sake,
Yeah, you can be Stephen Fry.
you can research
Yeah.
anything, and we know what to do to validate or invalidate somebody else's opinion. We
Yeah.
multiple source it. We look at the historical truth. We look at the present moment. We gravitate to great thinkers, people that we know are intelligent, who have been worried about the same things. Well, what do they have to say? It's an enormous advantage. I
Yeah.
say to them, when I was in college, I had access to an awful lot of other people's
Mm.
historical knowledge because I had the key to the university library and I could go
Yeah.
down there. But I had to climb up a ladder and take down a book. And
I like, by the way, just to deviate here for a minute, your story about being examined by the people at Cambridge University who asked you what you knew about Erasmus, and you basically talked to them and told them that you knew nothing about Erasmus, and you detailed why this was the division of your attention to all these other subjects, and you got into the school based on that. I thought that was a good anecdote, but also just such an interesting piece of the book. I want to jump to something that I found very touching in your book that also I'd put on the cover. I believe that all humans have two lives. Now, where this comes from is from your dad's obituary, and you wrote about him. I believe that all humans have two lives. We have one with a beginning, middle, and unfortunately an end. But then we have the potential of a second, equally real life, which consists of our effect in lifting up those around us and making their lives better. And the brilliant thing about that second life is that as they then forge careers, families, and friendships and achieve things, we go with them, we are in them. And that knock on effect, the passing of the baton, is like ripples on a pond. ever widening. And then you say, and that, my dears, is the closest I can get to telling you the meaning of life, capitalized. And if not every life, then for sure mine. You raise your kids, by a miracle, they turn out fine despite all your mistakes. You love your wife and friends. You do random acts of kindness, and then you die. That's the best deal we can get. And it's pretty wonderful. There. Now you know the secret too. Pass it on. I really liked that passage, but I also felt that, placing that in the context of an obituary for a father who hadn't had exactly your opportunities, but at the same time did very well in his field with his 1,000-card Rolodex, of all the names of the people he'd met on buses and everywhere else that he then wound up helping. It was a very warm kind of a wrap up. So, I mean, we've talked a little bit about that life philosophy here, and you say, I felt and continue to feel privileged to have been admitted to the greatest of clubs, the United States of America, where even with all our problems, almost anything is possible if you want enough and work hard enough. So that you've talked about that. And then you say, let's be honest, there is no decisive will in government or among the majority of voters to put kids first. So this gets into the meat of what you do philanthropically. We don't agree with giving children primacy as the future of our society. It would actually improve things for kids if we applied the existing framework of laws that protect animals. And then you go on in a very provocative section and you say how basically one of the great failings of our culture is to not invest in our children in so many ways. And as someone who has invested so heavily in time and energy and resources and fundraising and friendships with Steven Spielberg or whomever in children, talk about that part of your book for a bit here, rather than me just reading bits out of it, because I think it's the heart of the reason why you wrote the book. You're passing these lessons on to another generation, but also talking about why the hell aren't we doing more for them? So what is it about the United States of America in particular, with all the wonderful things we do have here in terms of opportunity, that, the religious writer, whomever that I come out of, you don't abort children, but after they're born, you're kind of on your own. We're not going to do anything for you. We turn away. And with cuts to Medicaid and everything else, now we're literally doing it. There's 9 million people going to be struck off the rolls. As someone who grew up in the UK, came to America, you're educated, from Cambridge University and so forth. Like, what happened here? Because America is not a cruel country. George Bush, who I knew personally, was as an evangelical Christian, and we knew him, was against the quote homosexual lifestyle, as he would have put it, and nevertheless went against many evangelicals' wishes when he started a worldwide program for AIDS research and treatment. Yeah. That's who we are. So how did we go from that to where we are today? And what is the problem with America that we don't see the children right in front of us? What is our I tell you
what I think is the underpinning instinct that unites Americans. We are brilliant. No one better in the world at fixing things after they're broken. But the spirit that built America, go west, young man. It tends to, if there's a town that's taken over by bandits, desperados, then in comes the sheriff, the iconic sheriff, and cleans it up and brings back law and order. We're great at that. What we're not so great at doing is preventing the town from falling into bad hands in the first place. Because to do that would have to do with our education system. It would have to do with things which take a long time to come to fruition. The Japanese trading companies, Matsushita and Sony and so forth, they have 100-year business plans that are revised every decade.
Yeah.
Honest to God, they have a continuous, ever-evolving 100-year business plan, which at least hypothesizes what they want their company to be in 100 years. Well, we are the opposite. Our stock exchange runs on quarterly earnings. What nonsense is that? That
Yeah.
a company's value will fall precipitously or rise precipitously because it's had a 12-week or 14-week period where
Yeah.
something good or bad has happened.
Hmm.
We run on short-termism, and it's not a good thing. Absolutely, let's fix things that are broken. There is no nation better in the world after a hurricane, or a tsunami or an earthquake or a
Hmm.
forest fire. You watch how young men and young women come and put out the flames and the rebuilders and the cleaning up the beach and so on and so forth. We're great at that stuff, but we are much less willing to
Hmm.
devote time and treasure and attention to more mundane and boring things like
Yeah.
the quality of early education, the quality of any education. Or let me use as an example our foster care system.
Yeah.
500,000 children in foster care, hair under 500,000. What do we know about them? Well, by definition, they're all the kids who have been abused or neglected. We also know that the perpetrators of abuse or neglect, roughly half of them were similarly abused or neglected
Sure.
themselves.
Yeah.
And we know that 2 years after aging out of foster care, which strangely and indefensibly, we determined that adulthood begins at age 18. I don't know about you, Frank, but I've
Yeah.
actually never met an 18-year-old who I felt was a fully functioning adult. If you're
Yeah.
lucky, your kids, somewhere in their mid 20s, late 20s, they become proper self-determinant adults who can
Sure.
be trusted to live a good life.
Yeah.
Until then, they need, help, which of course is the problem of foster kids because they haven't got anyone to help them.
Yeah.
Which is why within 2 years of aging out, a full half of America's foster kids are dead or homeless, or they have turned to a life of crime, or they are unemployed, or they are
Yeah.
incarcerated.
Yeah.
It's not good. And it costs, this country spends $80 billion a year on foster care. It's
Hmm.
roughly 40 billion is the cost of foster care, and the other 40 billion is the knock-on cost of all the bad things that happen because we don't do a better job of foster care. So
Yeah.
then one should ask the question, why don't we do a better job? Especially
Hmm.
as there are 2,200 jurisdictions, and they're not all appalling. They're just mostly appalling, but there are a few shining stars amongst
Hmm.
them where they have better outcomes. And so why don't we do anything about that? Well,
Hmm.
because what changes things in America politically, top down, uh,
Hmm.
is agency. It's people having the ability to affect change. But think of foster kids. They'll never march.
And they're not lobbyists in Washington.
They have no lobbyists. They have no money. They
Yeah.
don't vote. They will never chain themselves to the railings. And most of them who are abused or neglected, they don't even know that this is like an unusual bad thing. They
Yeah.
just think, well, I'm abused or neglected, and this is my life, and so be
Yeah.
it. I just
Yeah.
spoke to a kid, I guess 15, 16 years old, and I said, this was in one of our academies just
Hmm.
recently, and I said, we were having lunch, and I said, you always seem to be hungry. Like, why are you always so hungry?
Hmm.
You eat a mound of food on your plate. And he said, well, I am always hungry. I'm a growing boy, and
Sure.
I'm hungry. And I said, well, in your placement, what do you do when you get hungry? Can you just go to the fridge? And he said, no, I always go to bed hungry. And I said, well, why can't you just go to the fridge and get a snack the way
Yeah.
everybody else does? And he said, well, because it's got a padlock on it.
Yeah.
And I said, whoa, time out.
Yeah.
Who have keys to the padlock on the fridge?
Hmm.
And he said, well, the family who are fostering me. And I said, wait, who's in that family? And he said, well, there's mother, there's the father, and there are two teenage kids of their own. And I said, and the kids have the keys as well? He said, yeah, I'm the only one in that house that doesn't have a key to the fridge. Yeah. Think of what it does to the soul of a human being when they realize that they are unworthy of being able to have a snack before they go to bed. Or same thing, find a foster kid who has a proper suitcase for when they are moved from placement to placement. One of the things we do in First Star, we give everyone a really great rollerboard suitcase.
Yeah.
And it's funny when they are wheeled into the classroom because it's like a conga line of 30 of these rollerboards.
Yeah.
But normally what happens is the social worker says, okay, Harry, 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, you're being moved to another placement. Why do I have to move to another placement? I like it here. Well, I finally feel as though I got it right. No, you have to move to another placement because we need this place. What does he or she pack their stuff up in? It's a black trash bag.
Yeah.
What does it do to your soul if your worldly belongings, your poems and your music go in a trash bag? Makes you feel like trash, right?
Yeah.
So the best thing that we do, as far as I'm concerned, and there's a lot that we do, I mean, we get 89% of our foster kids in firststar.org go on to college against a benchmark for foster kids in America that's around 6%. So it's a gigantic success.
Huge, yeah.
We just had an alumni awards ceremony. We've got, people getting masters. We've got people, who are now functional professionals earning good money and married and just had babies and bought a house. What we had, one of the awards was for buying his house.
Yes, sure.
Being a homeowner is like a big deal. So the most valuable thing, and it's the only thing I feel able to teach in First Star other than videography, because I know a thing or two about that. I teach a class called Random Acts of Kindness and Pay It Forward. And I teach it to the 10th graders, and it's 2 90-minute classes. First class, I say, okay, you're walking along the sidewalk, and there's an old lady in rags lying fast asleep, face down. What do you do? Give me a show of hands. A, you stop and put $1 under her arm, but don't wake her up. B, you wake her up and give her the $1. Or C, you walk straight on by. And then we talk about, okay, that's you. What about generally, of 100 people, how many would do A, B, or C?
Yeah.
That leads to a conversation about the golden rule. The golden rule is the sense of social justice. It's the sense of equilibrium or balance in life. It's in 170 sets of scriptures of the world's 170 religions, and it's about balance. It's me seeing that an old lady lived in a damp cardboard box on some wasteland next to the San Diego freeway, and on the side of the box it said Sub-Zero. And I thought to myself, okay, I have the fridge. She is living in
the box. And incidentally, one of the things in your book, you have a picture of this sort of tent on wheels, this movable single space dwelling that came out of what you were doing to, help homeless people who, before they are homed,
Edar, the guy who helped me design it at the Pasadena Arts Center College of Design. He said, what do you want to call this thing? And I said, I have no idea. What do we want to call it? And between us, we said, well, everyone deserves a roof. EDAR. So they are called EDARs. The charity is edar.org, EDAR.org. And we have hundreds of people living in them, and it is absolutely not as good as a nice duvet in an apartment, but it is absolutely 100 times better
than a cardboard box.
The cardboard box.
Yeah, so, I just want to tell people once again, we're talking with Peter Samuelson, and besides all the social work you'll learn about in reading Finding happy user, finding happy, a user's guide to your life with lessons from mine. The other part of this book is terrific stories from inside the world of entertainment, but also personality, working with Steve McQueen on Le Mans when you were young. The question you asked Stephen Fry, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were 18? And then later you cast him as Oscar Wilde in the movie you made about that. And of course, I've heard Stephen Fry lecture on Oscar Wilde and talk about him and what his life meant to him in terms of forming his own ideas about being gay. And then you talk about Starlight. You have a passage on the Medici, which I'm very pleased to see in there because I'm a big fan of the Medici family in Italy and Florence and art and so forth. I'm just giving people an idea about the book. A better tent for the unhoused, and this is Idar, is not a solution, but it's better than the alternative, which is old ladies living amongst us in cardboard boxes. You give all sorts of advice. Here's some. So the challenge in making friends is to stay away from bullies, the foolish and the dangerous. We need to seek out the friends who share our values, but constantly urge us to do the right thing, just as we urge them. You have a piece that's sort of obliquely about Trump people. Remember, these people's bark is frequently worse than their bite. Cruelty, discrimination, and othering are going on, but your personal future is far from bleak, even amid these macro disturbances. We sort of talked about that. My goal as your author, mentor, and friend is to help you make something splendid of your life, and through that to achieve real happiness. And that's in part of your how-to book. You have some pointers here, bulleted pointers. We all need someone to love, someone who loves us. We need to laugh. Receiving and giving one random act of kindness every day is incredibly helpful. You talk about meeting with parents. How you met. They arranged to meet again and then again, and those dates went well. And then the third date, they arranged to meet at Baker Street Tube Station. I love that because I know where the station is. My father thought they agreed to meet at the left luggage office. Vivacious young Doris was quite sure they agreed to meet outside lost property. And then you talk about how they each thought the other had stood the other up. I love that story, by the way. And then in the end, they apologized. You have a very wise thing that I'm going to sort of go to here. You talk about don't make bad apologies. A bad apology, a failed apology, is usually a half-hearted one, a self-praising one, a defensive one. The first great rule is to phrase your apology in the way that will completely sell the idea persuasively to the other person. Don't say it weakly. Don't say, this is unfortunate. Say, I'm sorry for what I did. Don't say, I want to apologize. Start by just saying openly, I apologize. Take responsibility. I got this wrong and I'm sorry. I really love that. As someone who's stayed married and is happy now, I didn't always know what I know now. And I think a lot of the wisdom in your book reflects, what I've certainly loved and learned to be true in my life. You did have a bit of religion in your family. That was the non-Jewish upbringing. You interviewed and got a job at Religious Films. They were making a series of short films at the Bushy Studios north of London, each with a moral message designed to encourage people to live a good Christian lives. And this was funny here. Religious Films was owned by J. Arthur Rank, who of course was a titan of the film and entertainment business, who believed that film could not only entertain but also persuade. I went to St. Mary's Church of England primary school until I was 11. So you and I share that, by the way, because I went to a boarding school in Sussex called Great Wallstead when I was 10, and then a British version public school, which is a private high school in Wales after that, and so on and so forth. And the reason I'm just doing this quick thing here is I don't think we've given an idea of the scope of your book. I wrote this all for 3 hours. When the proctor said, pens down, I wrote the last line. And that is why I know nothing about Erasmus. We talked about that. And you talk about Mr. Lund. I love that you remember Mr. Lund's name and these people who helped you. On love, what you really are looking for is a relationship where one and one make three. The third thing is what you share. I love that. That's so much what a marriage is. You've made this third creature. It isn't just about the two of you, but what you are together. And then more on love. But I could suggest to you that the most overlooked way of meeting a really worthwhile potential mate with whom you will find much in common is to volunteer to a nonprofit charity. And then you go through why that makes sense. And I think that's such a good point, because I know a lot of young people that are trying the internet and dating and all the rest, and they don't think of that. So that alone is worth the price of the book for any young person reading that who wants to be in a relationship. And it's of course, what churches used to do with soup kitchens and so on. And for those outside of that context, that's so important. If you can share your victories with your sorrows, your path forward, as well as dealing with challenges. And more on love. Who can help you understand how to be a great partner in love? Clue, a wonderful opportunity to ask the right mentor for help. I love that you talk about having mentors. So that's very incomplete, but I wanted to give people a feeling of the scope of the book between, talking about Stephen Fry, Steve McQueen, these other people you've known, the movies you've made, the producers you've worked with, and the money you've raised from corporations and so on. That's part of the book, and it's kind of glamorous and interesting. But if I can put it this way, the very basic human learned wisdom that undergirds your own life is instructive and incredibly needed right now, where I think a lot of the young people you're talking with who are very underprivileged, but I'm talking about the privileged young people I'm talking with, to put it very bluntly, don't know shit when it comes to human relationships. Somehow we've managed to create a society in which we've forgotten very basic stuff that your dad meeting your mom knew about, and how to, apologize and get back together, and a kind of an organic way of meeting. So let me finish by just throwing it back to you when it comes to the subject of love that runs through your book, both romantic love and loving others and being kind and doing unto others. If there's one thing that links all your personal stories, your human relationships you had with people like Steve McQueen and his eccentricities, et cetera, Stephen Fry, the people you admire, and then the conclusions you draw in your how-to sections, I'd just say it's all about love.
I think that riff that you just did, Frank, is about as perceptive a précis of what I spent 18 months getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
Because I realized if I don't do this 5 days a week, I will never finish this book. So I just sort of made myself do it. That's about as perceptive a take on it and a memoir of it. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think unconditional love is the core value of the core values. I just don't think, I think it's like, water and food for the soul. And I think if you haven't got it, if you're starved or thirsty, I don't think you can possibly thrive. I'll leave you with one little experience that moved my heart. We had a talent show at UCLA for our, I guess they were 9th and 10th and 11th.
And by the way, this story is in the book and I love it. I actually teared up and there was tears on my cheek when I read it. I didn't see it coming. I just want to set it up.
So there we were in the Northwest Auditorium at the talent show. And one by one, we call them our scholars. Originally, people said we should call them the students. And I said, no, we'll call them the scholars. If we call them scholars, they'll act like scholars, hopefully. So there we were. And one by one, they're going down on the stage in front of an audience of, 150, 175 adults, most of whom they've never met, because it's kind of the administration and the faculty of UCLA. And they're singing a song, each of them, or they're doing a little dance, or they're doing spoken word, some poem that they've written. And down comes Catalina. And Catalina is a little itty bitty, pretty young lady, I suppose 15 and a half years old. And she's going to sing her song. So she got the microphone. And up comes the music on the playback, and she's like a deer in the headlights. She is so scared stiff that she cannot get the opening vocals out of her mouth. Now it gets worse and worse because, of course, the music has now left her behind, and then the music stops, and there's like a deadly silence in the whole auditorium. And I'm thinking, this is disgusting. This is awful. We've done a terrible, terrible thing. We must never do anything like this ever again. We've made her life worse by trying to give her an opportunity here. We've got to think this through better. And I can see out of my peripheral vision that the director of our academy is standing up. She's going to go down and usher her off. And then we're going to go on to the next person doing whatever they're doing. And then before that can happen, something amazing happens, absolutely not done by the grown-ups. In her cohort, her class of 30 students, there is a great big young man. He's kind of like a linebacker size, and he lumbers down there and he plants himself facing her back to the audience. And there's some whispering and we can't see her anymore. And now there's another 2 girls go running down, and now the 4 of them are there, and then 8, and then 15, and then 20, and then 30. The entire class, the cohort, is now in kind of a scrum down there, a lot of whispering, and then a hand on the outside makes an upward palm up gesture, meaning turn on the music. So the music, thank God, starts from the beginning. Out of the middle, invisibly, comes Catalina's voice, and it's very tentative to begin with, but the more she sings without being able to see the audience, and we can't see her, she ends up, by the end of the song, she sounds like Beyonce down there, and it ends, and the entire audience erupted emotionally. There were a lot of people crying, including me, and in applause, and the kids were like, they were shocked. They didn't know what to do. They had acted by instinct.
Yeah.
And the instinct that they felt was unconditional love. So they just put their arms around each other and they came down off the stage. I had to go for a walk, and I thought to myself, all we've done in First Star, nothing is rocket science. We have simply created an environment where the kids can find new siblings and new parents and new uncles and aunts, reliable grown-ups, but even more than that, peers who will be supportive of them and where they will enjoy being supported back. That is what unconditional love looks like. By definition, kids who've been abused or neglected, they don't have any of that.
Yeah.
But we create an environment, and given the opportunities, like watching flowers grow, the kids make that for each other.
Yeah.
And we see now, I mean, we've got kids who've been out of our academies 10 and 12 years and have gone off to, professional and personal lives doing something worthwhile. They remain through the alumni program tied together. We don't even know half of what they do in the alumni program because they just do it themselves. Those friendships, those sibling relationships with kids that they're not related to, it gives the lie. Roughly, depending on which of the academies, roughly 40 or 50% of the kids are black. Another 25, 30% are Latino, Latina, they're Hispanic, whatever. And the rest are everything else, Native American, white, whatever. They love each other with an intensity.
Yeah.
And it's platonic. It's, that they are brothers and sisters.
Yeah. And going up there, hey, you may not want to sing for the whole audience. How about you sing for me? I'm your brother. I have your back. I love that thing. So I just want to say Peter Samuelson is a social entrepreneur and a philanthropist who brings kids together who learn to love each other when no one else much has loved them, which is, I think, the greatest gift you give. Finding Happy, a user's guide to your life with lessons from mine. If you're a film buff, you're going to love it. You're the guy who I love your bit part with this Return of the Pink Panther, when you are the guy who takes the coat and the hat and steals them from Peter Sellers. I love the movie. I love all his work. I love Stephen Fry. I'd like to talk more about that sometime. But the main thing is, what I really want to do is encourage people to buy the book and to get involved with you. So I'm going to ask you a favor. When I sign off here, please don't go away. Stay and talk with my producer, Ernie, so we make sure we put all the right links to what you're doing for people who want to donate or follow. Also, the right links to your book to promote the hell out of it. And also, another question I have for you, if there's anybody, if you've just had this conversation with me and it's made you think, or you want to think of anyone, you're thinking, well, gee, maybe Frank would like to talk to so-and-so, maybe somebody you work with, or
Sure.
somebody in the movie business, or one of your kids. Doesn't have to be big, famous anybody. Please give that name to Ernie, because we're always looking for guests that we wouldn't know about without an introduction. And anytime you're doing anything you want to talk about, just get in touch with Ernie and say, I'd like to come talk to Frank some more and talk to your audience about this, because it's been a real privilege talking to you.
Well, back at you. This is about as perceptive and well prepared and appreciative an interview as I've had. It is the best interview to date, and I'm very grateful for that. And the book, Finding Happy, is for it's interesting. The publishers think the readership is different than the buyership. The buyership, we think, is adults, grown-ups, where they care about a young adult or a teenager, Gen Z, the lower end of and who is going into a transition. They're just about to graduate high school or graduate college, or they're having, heavy sledding professionally and finding their way in a career. And the readership is young people. And
of course.
Say to them, it's deliberately written in short chapters. You don't have to read the whole book. Look in the table of contents at the beginning and say, oh, that's interesting. I was wondering about that.
And go to that chapter. But the thing is, by dipping in and out of the book, they're going to find a thread that runs through it, as we talked about in terms of love. But I think you're lucky that this book's coming out now, because, as you know, a few years, not long ago, besides video cassettes and that kind of stuff, if you hadn't seen the Pink Panther, or whatever, you're not going to see it unless it's running on TV. Now, suddenly everything's available again. So, if you get interested in any movie you're talking about, if somebody wants to go back and rewatch Le Mans, there it is on Netflix or wherever it is. They can watch everything you've worked on and done in a heartbeat. So it's terrific. And as someone who dipped in and out of the film business, unluckily, but enjoyed my time there and learned a lot from it, I love your stuff. And I love that part of the book, and I love the wisdom. So I just hope people buy it and promote it. And if you'll just stick around and talk to Ernie, that would be great.
I tip my hat. Thank you for a great interview.
Hey, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Really lovely. And it was a really good read. I read every word. I enjoyed it. I loved it. And there's a lot more there to talk about, but people can read the book for themselves now. Thanks.
Thank you.